We have with us Council President Stephanie Finley from the City of Newburgh. Thanks for joining us. We've got Howie Harkema from Encompass Yamhill Valley, and we've got Casey Kula, Yamhill County Commissioner. And what I was saying earlier was that we're going to have special guests with us at the 3:30 hour. Jen Richter, who runs the Early Learning Hub, which is part of the state, based out of the Yamhill Coordinated or Community Care Organization, and she's an expert on all things childcare related. And last year, the county and the CCO together contributed money to help her do a survey of families, childcare providers, and businesses to find out what are the childcare needs in the county? Like, what are they really? We hear stories about the challenges here, the challenges there, but what is it? You know, is it the price? Is it the availability? Are people just not willing to do it? Can we find people? And what are the barriers that we can overcome? So hopefully we're going to hear from her in a little bit. But before we do that, Stephanie Finley, what would you like to share with the community?
Thanks, Casey. So we just had our first council meeting of the month last night. And because it is the month of June, we had our Pride Month proclamation. If you haven't read it, it's got some good content in it. It's not just words. It's really about how we treat our community members and how we celebrate this month as Pride Month. So we're very proud of that. And we're very excited that this is the second year in a row that we've proclaimed June as our Pride Month. And we had Remy from McMinnville and Kristen Stoller there to accept that on behalf of Wine Country Pride. So we were very excited about that. This was a big meeting because we finally are done and our budget is approved. So we approved our budget last night. We are ready to go. As everybody knows, in this time of COVID, funds are low and the list of things to do is long. So we are excited to have gotten through that process, especially since we had big turnover in our finance department. So we're really happy about that. And then we are sort of ahead of the game when we're talking about middle housing in Newburgh. And so last night we passed an ordinance to amend some of our code in Newburgh. So we're going to start talking more and more about that middle housing. And so last night was about duplexes, and we had a long and good, robust conversation about what comes up next with townhouses, cottages, things like that. So those are the big things on our plate right now. And then the library is open. And they've been really kind of open this whole time, but they're open for patrons to come in. It looks like we're going to be expanding library hours, and we are kicking off the summer reading program at our library in Newburgh. So I encourage people to get their all of their stuff from the library that they need for their summer reading, and also to look for their mascot and look for some of the other great programs that are going on with the library. So it's starting to feel like summer in Newburgh, and we are very excited about that.
Nice, thank you. So Stephanie, on the Pride Proclamation, what are some of the specific things that you talked about that's like more than just yay?
Okay, that's a really good question.
Are there specific things that are happening in Newburgh associated with Wine Country Pride as well?
So go to Wine Country Pride's website, because they will give you a lot more information than I can give you. But we have businesses. You will see pride flags around town from businesses and homes that are celebrating with our community. And we have businesses in Newburgh that are going to be part of the Rainbow Quest, which is a program where you can go and you can get specific drinks and other treats. And part of those funds will go to some scholarships for high school kids. So we're excited about that. But what really is exciting about the work that we're doing at the City of Newburgh is in our proclamation, we really are talking about the reason why we celebrate Pride. And so we have called out specifically things like the Stonewall riots and things like that as being really the basis for why we have this month and why we celebrate this month. And so besides it just being a celebration, it's also an acknowledgement of our community's fight to have some equal rights for the people that we love so much in our community that are LGBTQA and I. So we're excited about that. And I'm really proud of that work that we've done in Newburgh.
Awesome. Thank you. And Howie's got a question, and then I have another one for you.
Stephanie, how many representatives do you have in the PFLAG group?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I can get back to you on that, but I don't have an answer for you on that.
No worries. I just wondered because we're trying to, as you know, emulate somewhat what you guys are doing there in McMinnville as well. And so I just wondered if you had a rough magnitude idea.
I don't, but I can get you in contact with the folks that are doing that. I know that one of our former counselors is highly involved in the PFLAG group in Newburgh, and that's sort of a passion of his. So I definitely can hook you up with the folks that have done that to get you started.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And then my next question for you is: so the middle housing work did that come out of is it HB 2001 or the elimination of the single family zoning, or is this other work that the council has prioritized?
So it really does come out of HB 2001, and we're just getting ahead of it. So one of the things for us is that when we hit that marker where we become a large city, and we're very close to that marker, and so we want to get some of that work done ahead of time because we know we're going to hit that number in not too long, and so we want to make sure that we are planning ahead and getting some of that work done ahead so that we're not scrambling behind. And, you know, it's sort of like all the little pieces of the puzzle. So every little bit that we can do now to make sure that we're able to get some better, more affordable housing in our community is really important to us. And so we want to make sure we did that before we needed to, because you know, when you get to that line where you have to do it, it's a little too late. So we're trying to get ahead of that and make sure that we're getting everything in order to make sure that we are in compliance with that, but also because we really need that kind of housing in our community.
All right, my next question: Howie, is it okay if I ask one more follow-up on that one?
Absolutely.
Before it goes out of my mind, which is can many people, or I've heard from people, my colleagues, folks at the Chamber of Commerce, that systems development charges in the city of Newburgh seem to be very high relative to other places. But we rarely hear the other side of that, which is the reasons why they are the way they are. Do you feel equipped to provide that perspective?
You know, we're actually
hitting you too much on the spot.
I will answer some of that. So we are actually in the process of looking at system development charges, and we had already started that conversation at the council level because we do want to make sure that we are encouraging businesses and we are encouraging development in Newburgh, because we need that and we want that. But we also know that infrastructure is expensive, and you know, we can't pay for water, sewer, the things that we really need for infrastructure if we don't have those system development charges. And so we're really trying to find that balance between making sure that we have enough revenue coming in where we can provide good services for the businesses that we want to be here and the development that we want to be here, but also not discouraging people from coming here. And so that's what the conversation is right now. We know that we have system development charges that seem a little bit higher than other places, but there are some reasons for that. You know, and we're just looking at how we can mitigate sort of that in between area so that we can make sure that we're still providing access for development, but also paying for the things that we need to pay. One of the things that we talked about last night that we're excited about is the Urban Renewal Agency, and that Urban Renewal is coming up, and I think that is going to help guide a lot of that work, but it takes a lot of infrastructure when we're talking about the mill site and some of those other areas that don't have that infrastructure already. That's what system development charges pay for. And so if we want to make sure that they're getting those kinds of things ahead of building there, then we need to make sure that we have the money to do that. And so it's one of those questions that's hard to answer because there are so many pieces that go into that puzzle, but it is something that we are consciously thinking about and having discussions about.
Okay, great. Because I was going to, before Howie had his question, I was going to do a follow-up of urban renewal, but I will ask you about that because you are more up to date on it than me. But Howie had another comment for you, or question.
Well, I have two comments, actually. One's a comment. Very proud of Newburgh for being so proactive for the affordable housing situation. Rick and all of you are doing a great job. But I do have a question about construction excise tax. And do you know what the percentage is in Newburgh for construction excise tax?
Oh, you would ask me that on a day that my brain's not working. You know, we actually had that discussion not that long ago, so I should have it off the top of my head, but I don't. I'm sorry. I can get that answer for you, but I don't want to give you a number that's wrong. But yes, it is something that we actually talked about not too long ago. Within the last few months, we talked about construction excise taxes, but I don't have that number for you today, but I can definitely get it for you.
We're doing the same in McMinnville.
Yeah.
Affordable Housing Committee.
Yeah.
And then Howie, did you have a question, or that was the question? Was the
yeah,
number on
comment and a question. Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. So urban renewal, how does urban renewal work? For the folks who are going to watch this, how does it work? Why do we need to have it? Why do some people oppose it? Can it really cover the costs of getting utilities and improving the area around the mill site?
Okay, that's lots of questions, and I will be honest that I am not the best expert to talk about that, but I will talk about some of those things. So one of the things is, I know it seems boring, but if you can go and look at and watch our council meetings, that will give you a lot of information. So last night we went through urban renewal, and we had our consultants there to give a really good background on that and what it is and how it works, because it's something that is hard to understand sometimes if you haven't gotten all of the information. But the way that urban renewal works is that you are not going to be taxed anything more. We're actually just using the taxes that are already being collected and putting them to a different place to work for us. And so oftentimes people oppose urban renewal because they think we're taking money from the schools or we're taking money from other taxing districts, which is not entirely accurate. So one of the things that we were really excited about and we were happy to do was that we invited those taxing districts to be at the table when we created this plan. So the Urban Renewal Committee consisted of community members, but also consisted of people from the school district and from TVF&R, which are the other taxing districts that can be somewhat impacted by this. And so they sat at the table when we made these plans so that they could look over those plans and make sure that it worked for them. So what it does is it takes the existing revenue streams and sort of filters them into a different place than they're going to right now. And so what you're going to see from our urban renewal, and you can go on our website and look at what the sort of list of all the projects are. And it's a long list, so I can't tell them all to you today, but they're broken up into different places. One of the major places that we're looking at urban renewal is down at that waterfront mill site, because we know that that is prime real estate to get some really good stuff going in there that will also generate some more revenue. And so that's one of the big areas, but that doesn't have the infrastructure that it needs now to make sure that we have the industry come into those places. And so what that urban renewal will do is allow us to do some of that infrastructure so that it'll be ready to build on when we have developers come in and want to put things on that property. We're also looking at doing a lot of work in the downtown area to make sure that we have a downtown area that's walkable, that is easy access for people. We talk a lot about parking in downtown and how people are going to access those things. So you're going to see a lot of that kind of thing. And it's kind of the balance between that infrastructure that people don't see, the water, the sewer, things like that, that you don't really see. And then also making sure that there are things that the public at large sees and is going to use. So things like a path that goes through that waterfront area so that there's some recreation down there, things like that that you will see and you will use on a regular basis. And so we're really trying to balance those two things to make sure that people really get the most bang for their buck. Now, we had to pare down our list of things because the list is endless of things that we would like to do, but the money is not endless. And so we had to pare that down. And if you go to our website, you'll be able to see sort of what areas are the primary areas that we're going to be looking at and what the projects are going to be on those areas. In terms of urban renewal, it's got a finite end date. So we set it out for 30 years. And that's because it does impact some other taxing districts, and we don't want that to be endless. And so it does have a sort of sundown date of 30 years. If we get those projects completely done in 20 years, then it will end. But we did set it out for 30 years, and we're confident that we're going to get a lot of that work done in those 30 years.
Awesome. And it looks like Howie has that question for you. Thank you.
I was wondering, your mayor, Rick Rogers, and I have been talking about vertical housing in Newburgh, and I was wondering how things are going at the city council level on vertical housing.
Yeah, so that's something that we are talking about, and that sort of goes right in with that middle housing, the smaller units in more creative places. And we did some work on vertical housing not too long ago. I can't remember the specifics, but we are talking about that vertical housing so that we can get more housing in smaller spaces. It's sort of the balance between vertical housing and sprawl. And so trying to keep that balance between going up and going out and making sure that we're sort of being really thoughtful about that, in places where we can be thoughtful about that and making sure that we're sort of balancing those things. But we have done some work on vertical housing, especially for sort of that downtown area and some of the other areas that we're going to be looking at for urban renewal.
Don't you have a 35-foot restriction right now?
That sounds right. But I think we just did some work on that not too long ago. And so I think you'll be seeing more about that vertical. And Doug Rux is the one who is the expert at that, and he would know a lot more than I do about that. But yeah, I think we're going to have to look at that vertical housing as being something that is necessary because there's only so much land to sprawl to, and we need to make sure that we have enough housing for everybody that needs it.
And my last question is, how is everything going at the new emergency center shelter?
I've heard great things. I've heard really great things. I just talked to someone that spent some time down there recently, and things are going really well. I think they had a few little hiccups with COVID, which is to be expected, but I think things are running smoothly, and I think it's a really good project. I think people are really happy with that, and I'll be honest in saying that I haven't heard anything negative coming from that. I haven't heard complaints about that, and I've only heard good things about that. And for me, I really like that it's in the middle of our community. It's not something that's set out somewhere where nobody can see it, where the residents can't access, our downtown and things like that. So I really feel like it's been a really good project, and it was a really, really good addition to our community.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for letting us ask you a bunch of questions. This has been great. I really appreciate it, at least. And Chehalis Parks and Rec got their funding from the state, where it's in the budget, at least, at the state now, for the first phase of the bypass, or the Fred Meyer to the waterfront to Dundee bypass trail. Very exciting. Howie, what would you like to share with people in the community today?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about Encompass first. So Sunday Sandwiches is a brand new program that is part of Encompass, but part of Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of McMinnville, plus McMinnville Library. So we had a gap in food services for Sundays, and we had a meeting, and the Unitarians jumped right in and said, we'll do it. And so beginning last Sunday at 2:00 under the breezeway at McMinnville Library, they began the process of feeding our marginalized citizens and our houseless citizens from underneath that breezeway. What they don't use that day, they take over to the Gospel Rescue Mission. And so all the food gets used. So we're very excited about that. I just posted on Facebook to get the word out today to our the people on the streets that truly need the food. And so quickly, I think it's already mounted up to over 700 people have viewed it and shared it. And so wonderful things are going to happen because of that. So people will be fed on Sundays as well as Monday through Saturday. We also, through Jenny Berg at the McMinnville Library, now have the Carnegie Room on Wednesdays for our municipal court docket. And so we are able to, instead of, as you know, when Champion Team closed, there was some question of whether or not we would continue to be able to do that. Well, having a meeting with Carrie and I and Jenny and Courtney at the library, they allowed us to have the Carnegie Room from around 9 a.m. till whenever we're done on Wednesdays. So we are doing the municipal court docket through EYD, through Kristen Norton. And she has all the names get emailed to her in the docket, and then she goes and finds them. And whoever needs to go to court that day, she definitely works with them to do either a Zoom or a telephone call, because nothing's being done in person at the municipal court right now. The last thing I have is tomorrow. I had an invite from Newburgh Noon Rotary, and I will be giving a homelessness in Oregon and Yamhill County presentation, and also on Encompass Yamhill Valley and the Compass Center to come. I'm very excited. It's at the Chehalim Cultural Center at noon. And I understand if you're a Rotary member, you can jump into Zoom and watch it there if you're uncomfortable in being at the facility with the last remnants of COVID still being around. I've had both my vaccinations, so I'm doing this in person. It's not a Zoom. It's the first non-Zoom thing I've done in 15 months. So I'm very excited to do it in person. So that's what I have for everybody today.
Great, thank you very much, Howie. And along the lines of a lot of the work that Howie does, the Project Turnkey is a program that was funded by the state legislature through the emergency board. The money was sent to the Oregon Community Foundation to help communities purchase distressed motels to help with housing people from wildfire, COVID risk, and then get them transitioned into permanent stable housing. And in our community, Oregon Community Foundation is working with Providence, Newburgh, and YCAP to purchase a motel, and they've now agreed they are going to purchase it, so that is moving forward. And this gets all wonky. The legislature's joint subcommittee on economic development and infrastructure, I think is what it's called, has approved additional gap funding to fund 4 more projects throughout the state. And one of them includes finishing off the funding gap for the Yamhill County motel purchase. So the last 4 were in Malheur County, Yamhill County, Multnomah County, and I want to say Bend, somewhere in Deschutes County. So they're all scattered around the state, and in one of those wonderful legislative moments, there was unanimous support for moving it to the full Ways and Means, which is the last step for measures that require funding before it gets approved on the legislature, the floor of the House. So it was really great to see. I was the Representative Pam Marsh from Ashland, and I were the sole people testifying for the bill. Last Thursday morning, but it was really fun to be there and to see the support at joint subcommittee. So hooray for that. The motel sheltering project has been very successful in Yamhill County, getting people off the street, out of the woods, and into safe housing. So I'm excited to keep this going forward. And I feel like so much of the work that you've done over the past years and years and years, Howie, has really helped that.
Well, I'm just glad to be part of the team that is working so hard to make these things happen.
Yeah. And before we have Jen Richter join us, I wanted to give you a few updates as well. First of all, Councillor Finley, did you have questions for Howie?
I don't, but I want to say thank you so much to Howie for all of the work that he does. And I actually was able to pull up really quick to answer your question more fully about the vertical housing, is that resolution was passed for a vertical housing development zone in May, and it will be effective June 16th of this year. Mm-hmm. So if you want more information about it, you can go to our website and it will show you what those changes are. But I wanted to make sure because I couldn't remember exactly what date we passed it and when it went into effect. So it does go into effect in June. So.
Well, you're a quick researcher. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, yeah. So one exciting thing that you all probably heard from last week was that the governor gave us more details around what it looks like when the state reaches that 70% vaccination rate. And for folks who haven't heard, what that means is no checking of vaccination status at the door, because there won't be masks required for indoor settings, with a few exceptions, which will really make the lives of business owners and their frontline staff a lot better. So on that one, it also means that capacity restrictions on businesses goes away and indoor settings goes away, which is also a huge thing as we go into summer and as case counts continue to go down. Along those lines, Yamhill County on Friday will be moving down to moderate risk status from the high risk category. And we just snuck in kind of with a caveat that there is an outbreak that's reported at the penitentiary in Sheridan. And that bumped our numbers up to keep us in the high risk category. But because in theory, folks who are incarcerated aren't interacting with the general public, the state takes out the numbers from their risk status because of the risk. Now, it's not totally accurate because there are people that are moving back and forth from penitentiary to the outside world all the time. But that's what they've decided to do. And it means that businesses can loosen up their restrictions even before we get to that 70% number statewide, which looks to be somewhere around between June 21st and June 30th. And with that, I also would like to welcome Jenna Sanders. And can you remind me of your title? And I say that because Jen Richter was like, oh, she's the blah, blah, blah with the blah, blah, blah. And he was lots of titles. And Jen is here. She has a different name. So I'm going to welcome both of you and tell us about yourselves. But also then as the next step, can you tell us about what we learned last year about childcare availability and affordability in the community, and what can we do about it? Yeah, so it's great to have both of you.
Thank you for inviting us. Appreciate the invitation. Do you want to go first, Jenna? Sure. So my name is Jenna Sanders, and I'm the Associate Program Director for Childcare Resource and Referral. And we cover Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties. And we just opened an office in McMinnville, and I run the McMinnville office. So We help support childcare providers. We do trainings to get them licensed. We do anything we can to help them improve quality, support them if they're experiencing challenges, just sort of everything we can do to try and improve the number of childcares in our area, but also really help support them in their business practices day to day. Jen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jennifer Richter. I'm the Early Learning Director with Yamhill CCO's Early Learning Hub. The Early Learning Hubs around the state, just to give you a little context, are really tasked with creating cross-sector system alignment for programs that support family stability and school readiness. Childcare expansion is becoming more and more of a focus for all of the early learning hubs. In our next contract cycle, we're mandated to work more closely with childcare resource referral, but we already do in Yamhill County. It's a very close partnership here, so it's not a whole lot is going to change in Yamhill. But around the state, they're really recognizing that this is key for both family stability, frankly, and for school readiness to have quality childcare opportunities available. Yamhill County is what is considered a childcare desert. By a childcare desert, that means that there are more than 3 children per regulated slot. So 2 out of 3 don't have a place to go. They might have an aunt to go stay with or a neighbor or something, but they don't have a regulated licensed slot for them. In Yamhill County, we have, I have all my stats over here on the other screen, which is why I'm looking off into space, but we have an estimated 5,913 children through the age of 5. We have a total of 2,427 slots, and only 1,700, just under 1,700 of that is a licensed capacity. So there's a big gap that we're trying to address. Yeah, a big gap. Our biggest gaps in service are really, there's several buckets where the need is greatest. Out in the West Valley, there is not much of anything. We have a head start out there. We now have Preschool Promise, which is wonderful, but there's not a whole lot else out there. We don't have nearly enough childcare for infants and toddlers. The ratios are much smaller, and so it's very difficult for providers to provide that kind of care. It's very difficult to find. Evenings and weekends are also hard to find. Drop-in care, if you work irregular hours or you just, you're picking up temp work, those kinds of things, really hard to find care for those families. And then culturally specific bilingual care is also difficult. Sometimes you can find providers that speak Spanish, but providers that are culturally aware and, are bicultural, that is something that we're really trying to cultivate. One of the big challenges for families is the cost of care. So the average cost for a preschool child is $564 a month per child, for a preschool child. It's a little less for a school-age child. It's more for an infant or a toddler. But it's, if you have 2 kids, you're easily putting $1,000 or more, possibly more, into childcare every month. So if you're making $15 an hour, it's pretty difficult to stay afloat. So,
and I think at this point, a lot of what I'm hearing is that people, partly because of COVID and partly just because of minimum wage and other things, especially centers, are charging upward of $1,000 a month for infants.
Right. Yeah. And Jenna, you were going to talk a little bit about the different types of childcare that we have.
Yeah. So when you think about licensed childcare in the state of Oregon, there's sort of 2 primary buckets, one of which are programs that are run in homes. So the majority of those are homes that people live in. And so there is registered family, which is 1 provider with up to 10 children. And of those 10 children, only 2 of them can be under 2 at any one given time. And then they can only have up to 6 that are under school age, so before kindergarten. And then there's certified family, where a provider can have up to 16 children, depending on the square footage of their home and whether or not they have helpers. I will say, both for all types of programs right now, there's a huge struggle in terms of finding staff, because when you think about the cost of providing care versus the cost of what they're charging, it's really challenging for them to pay much more than minimum wage. And a lot of people are like, I don't want to change diapers. I'd rather go work at Walmart or Safeway or someplace where, you know, children aren't peeing and pooping and kicking me. So, you know, it's been a real struggle for providers to find staff. And then there is centers, and centers are in commercial buildings. And how many children they can have is very much based upon the square footage and then the number of staff they have. For centers with infants, their ratio is 1:4. And then toddlers, which goes up to age 3, is 1:5, which is part of why infant toddler care is challenging, because there is no way financially for them to make enough money for those rooms to break even. So what happens is that programs that are providing centers that are providing infant toddler care are subsidizing those rooms with what they're making from school-age children and preschool children. And so, like during the pandemic, what's happened is some of those programs have had to reassess financially because of the changes in ratios and things that happened, whether or not they could continue to provide infant and toddler care, because it's where they're losing money. And so we've lost even more slots, I think, for infants and toddlers during the pandemic. It's really difficult to figure out how many programs we've lost throughout the pandemic, because some people closed while there was a state of emergency going on. So we're still trying to figure out how many of those programs are permanently closed versus how many of those programs temporarily closed. I think that come September, we'll have a better idea of what that looks like, but it's been a challenging number. People are like, what did we lose? And we're like, well, we don't really know. So we're still trying to figure that out. Yes, Howie.
Jenna, do you know what the ratio is on the square footage? I understand the number for assistants and such.
I think that part of why I hesitate is I know that it changed partly during COVID. I think that it's usually 50 square feet per child, but I'm not positive where they've landed on that right at this moment. But you also have to think that when they're measuring square feet, they're having to, it's usable space. Right. So it's not necessarily the square footage of the building, it's the square footage of the space in each room that they can use.
So what do we do about that? The challenge, right, of the ratio and how it's toddlers and infants are subsidized by olders. The challenge of finding childcare providers who can get a job paying the same or better, but without diaper changing. And then this clearly enormous gap. Jen, were the numbers right that it was like 9,000-ish children 0 to 5 who need childcare, and then 2,000 slots? Or I feel like I need to get those numbers in my head.
It's 5,913 was our estimated from 2017. So that data is a little bit old, but it hasn't changed that much. And then the total number of slots in the county is 2,427. Total licensed capacity is 1,698.
And then Jen, And Jenna as well. What did we learn from the survey that was done? Did we learn anything more to add to that older information?
Basically, the survey backed up what we've been hearing anecdotally. Which are those needs and gaps that I was sharing earlier, that those really are a significant problem that we need to address as a community. And, you know, as we get centers in place that are a little bit larger and they're able to have those older kids, that helps build up the infant toddler supply. It's when those family-based centers, they just can't afford it. But those larger centers, that's, you know, they can afford a little bit of leeway. But it takes some time. It takes real estate. It takes investment. I mean, we've been working with providers that are trying to retrofit or trying to work with septic systems and all these different things. These all cost money. So, you know, it's an investment to start a child care center. So
I think that part of what we learned from the survey we did and from the pandemic is that engaging the business community and engaging like the county commissioners and really having it be a more system-wide kind of conversation about, you know, where are resources we can leverage. We have some bigger businesses in the county that have said, hey, we want to participate, we want to support. We've realized through the pandemic that this is incredibly important, because if our employees don't have childcare, they can't come to work. And so I think that it's starting to have those conversations about how do we, you know, look at, you know, different cities and their codes and the county codes, and how do we leverage all of the resources that we have in the community to really have impact, rather than having it be this sort of siloed thing where we're like, okay, you know, right. I think the other really exciting thing that's happening is we'll see how things turn out with the legislature, but there's some bills in terms of looking at asking asking people to rent to people who want to do childcare, because that's been another thing that's been happening in the last couple of years, is that a lot of the leasing agencies and rental agencies are like, if you're going to do childcare in the house, we won't rent to you, which has been constricting the supply as well. So hopefully some of those things can get addressed.
Right. And we also need to really consider workforce development. You know, childcare providers, in order to move up in the quality rating and be eligible for jobs that are a little bit higher paying, that are going to provide stability for the workforce, they need at least their associates, you know, even better if they get a bachelor's, and that takes money. And so we need to start thinking about what we're investing in our workforce as well, and supporting these young folks and some not so young folks to join the workforce and really invest in their education so they can invest in our children.
Right, and Head Start has a program, right? I feel like Jen and I were on a meeting with Suey Linsemeyer, and she was talking about their program. Do you have any details on it, or enough to speak about it? I can't really remember. I just know that they help students pay for their schooling.
They are very supportive of helping them get their CDA. I don't have the details, but I do know that it's a super high priority for Suey, who's our director, and that she does do everything she can. She works a lot with Portland Community College and somewhat with Chemeketa to try to help provide cohorts that can support the providers. And there's even been some work done with Chemeketa in the recent past. It's been a couple of years now, but doing cohorts in Spanish for those providers that don't have enough English to get their CDA by themselves. So that's something that's, we have to have critical mass to make that work for the college. But when we do have that critical mass, it can be really helpful in getting those bilingual, bicultural providers their education.
The other kind of exciting thing that's happening right now. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. Is there's some conversations about looking at tapping into some of the federal apprenticeship dollars and leveraging that to try and help support programs in getting people, to a level where they need to be to become preschool teachers and early education specialists. And so that's kind of exciting as well, just because a lot of those programs, like we were talking about, are barely making money. And so they don't necessarily have a lot of funds to say, hey, we're going to pay for you to go to college, or hey, we're going to pay for you to, get more pay, as you get these things. And so leveraging some of those resources may be a really fabulous way to go. Other states do it.
Howie, I think, has a question as well.
Yeah.
I do. This is for both of you, Jen and Jenna. The state of Oregon seems to be looking deeply into this matter as well. What have you heard from the legislators, and what have you heard from the Senate and the House?
Well, there was a letter that I read just this morning that was signed by the education committees from both the House and the Senate, asking, and if I knew this question was going to be asked, I'd have the numbers up in front of me, but they're asking for that they fully fund the education budget, including restoring the 1.4 cut to the early learning hubs, which was front and center, which was very exciting. And then the next was, I want to say $300 million for childcare expansion, but please don't quote me on that. I'd have to pull the letter up. But both committees were saying, please fund this. This is critically important to our
well, it's our future.
To our future, right? Exactly, and to our economic recovery, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and there is is it 20% of the Student Success Act that goes to early childhood, Jen?
Yes.
I think it's 20%. So there was an expansion in the last year and a half with Preschool Promise, which is state-funded preschool, which we got for the first time in Yamhill County this last year. Dayton School District and Sheridan School District both were providing that. So I think that there is more and more, and President Biden's the American Families Plan has proposed free preschool for all 3 and 4-year-olds, funded, in conjunction with the feds and the state. So I think that this topic is seeing more visibility in state and federal funding than we probably ever have. It's part of it is that it's just going to take time for some of those things to start to be more visible and sort of trickle down. But the state of Oregon's plan is where they're moving toward. Their vision is free preschool for all.
Right. Can I circle back on that letter, because I did quote it wrong, and I know this is recorded. So it's 30 to 40 million for childcare for Oregon. We support establishing a new early learning agency that consolidates childcare programs and unifies publicly funded early care and education, providing the infrastructure to be able to support the expansion. That's what was called out.
That's super helpful. My next wonder, kind of along the lines of Howie's question there, is, what's Jenna was talking about how just the expense of setting up a commercial license. It's a licensed childcare center, right? The centers is a big cost. But what's the? Do you have an idea of the ratio of children who are in licensed centers versus the 2 other registered and licensed home? I feel like that would be an interesting thing to know, is like, are they doing the bulk of it, or is it in-home care that's doing the bulk?
I have those numbers, but not easily accessible.
We've been asking about numbers and all meeting long, and people have been magically pulling them up with a few seconds.
I'll work on
a few
it.
moments.
It's all in search terms.
Right.
My challenge of the moment is I'm on a loaner computer, and so pulling things up is not quite so easy for me today as it is some days.
Got it. I know that when a licensed childcare provider wanted to look for space in the McMinnville area, it was very, there weren't a lot of options within the city, and so they looked outside the urban growth boundary. And it turns out that light industrial zoning was one of the few that seemed reasonable, but there's not any permitted you can't do childcare in a light industrial zone.
Right.
So there's like, you know, the setting up a facility is a barrier cost, but then going through land use is another barrier, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Maybe we need the HB 2001, Councillor Finley, of childcare. Yeah. I do want to note that in Newburgh, you know, there was what looked like was going to be a very high systems development charge for DCI. And then because of that, they stopped and they looked around to see what the best next option would be. And portables on the Newburgh Public School campus seems like a great option that they discovered then. Oh, discovered with lots of work.
Yes.
They didn't just happen upon them.
That is a very exciting partnership.
Yeah.
In DCI and Newburgh School District. Very exciting.
So Councillor Finley, that is an area where it seems like the systems development charges were the boogeyman, and instead they were the savior of the project, right?
Sure. And you know what, we, in the SDC conversation, I know this is off topic a little bit, we are talking about how to appropriate SDCs based on who it is. So if Walmart wants to build a different SDC measurement for them than, say, a childcare facility. So that is in conversation about how to manage SDCs and appropriate them differently to different types of projects.
That would be amazing. I know that one of the things that we've gotten from centers is that some places what they're being charged is the same amount as a school. And so, I mean, you can think about the difference in financing between a school district and a center. There are 22 centers in Yamhill County. So when you talk about, and I could pull up the number of children they serve, but when you talk about numbers, there are many more family childcare, but they don't necessarily, it's the number of children they serve is probably fairly equal.
Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you. Thanks for looking it up.
Mm-hmm.
So what I wonder is, this seems like it's a long-term problem that doesn't have easy short-term solutions, but what are the things that you say, like, if we had the funding, this was the short-term solution, and if we had the funding, this is the long-term solution?
I would say continuing those conversations around zoning and those things that we can do to make it easier. Definitely the partnerships, the public-private partnerships are going to be critical. Workforce, investing in the workforce. Those are all kind of longer term, but if we're really going to move the dial, those are the things that I would say we really need to focus on.
One of the other sort of suggestions that doesn't necessarily take a lot of money, but is starting to build connections with high school students in terms of, I mean, it might take money to convince them that it's worth moving into early childhood, but you know, there are places where they're doing creative things like trying to get them enough hours that they could work in a childcare facility upon graduation and things like that. And so I think there's some workforce development stuff that could be done sort of at that high school level as well. Yeah.
Along those lines, is there any thought or talk about partnering with the colleges for workforce development around those kinds of things? Because I know both McMinnville and Newburgh have pretty prominent colleges, and it seems like that would be a good place to tap into some of that workforce.
The conversations that we've had around workforce development, and we have one, we're in the process of scheduling one for the next couple of weeks, is around, it was with Shemeketa, to get folks to the associate level. We haven't had a lot of conversation yet, as in I haven't had any conversation yet with the four-year universities. It's been more focused on that, the CDA level, the associates.
Part of, I think, the challenge with quite frankly, with the community colleges and the universities is that we're sort of engaged in a fight for them to keep those programs at all, because, when they look at their financial, things and whether or not whether or not what people can make upon graduation is worth them getting degrees and all of their calculations that they make, the colleges are not super excited, especially in an era when they're facing budget cuts, to maintain these programs. And so I think in the short term, it's really just advocating that that they even maintain early childhood programs, and that they don't cut them.
And trying to work together to have the conversations with the community partners. If, for example, Head Start has a group that needs support, or if there's providers that, if we can get enough to make it worth Shemeketa's investment or any community college's investment, but that takes some coordination across the community to get enough people in the seats to make it financially doable.
And then I guess the follow-up question for Councillor Finley's question is, how do we make it work that providers are paid better? And you explained the challenge of, like, how do we do how does a provider, like the license holder, make it work financially? But it seems like one of the big questions.
So one of the challenges is that a fair number of programs accept the employment-related daycare funds, which is parents who are lower income get subsidized by ODHS, and how much that people get reimbursed by DHS gets reevaluated every couple of years. And what they look at historically is what people are charging. And so part of what we've been engaged in is really encouraging providers to look at their rates and reflect back actual costs and the state is actually also looking at reevaluating rates based on actual costs, because without looking at that, those rates continue to stay at a place where it's not financially beneficial to be in business for a lot of people. And so starting to really look at what is the actual cost of this, and then what programs can we leverage to help support those costs, like Preschool Promise, like Baby Promise, like partnerships with Head Start. All of those things can help sort of lift without necessarily causing harm to families in terms of cost.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. Howie's got a question for you. And then I need to wrap up pretty soon here too. So
I just wondered, Jenna, if that's on a sliding scale based on their income.
In order to qualify right now for the ERDC, your income has to be below 200% of poverty level. And pre-pandemic, they had co-pays that were based on how much the household made. So the parents were paying a portion and the state was paying a portion. During the pandemic, they have waived the co-pays just to try and help support families.
Right. Are there other questions? it's been so helpful to hear from both of you. Thank you for joining us. And we had a great conversation about so many things Newburgh related before you joined us. So
Thank you so much for the invite.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my goal is to get you to convince you and my colleagues to join the Board of Commissioners meeting in a couple of weeks so that we can hear about the survey, hear your thoughts, and see how the American Rescue Plan money can go towards some of this work, whether it be the code changes or facilities upgrades. So
that would be amazing.
Forward to it. That would be great.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. Any last thoughts from anyone? All right, we will see you next week.
All right.